Hey there everyone, it's Mr. Hayden here, and I wanted to go over some methods related to 2D arrays that might be similar to what you would see on tomorrow's quiz. So in the first one that I have here, the precondition is that nums is an array with nums.length being equal to nums0.length. So that means there are the same number of rows as columns. And then the postcondition is return true if the sum of each numbered row is equal to the sum of each corresponding column. In other words, the sum of the elements in row 0 are equal to the sum of the elements in column 0. Then the sum of the elements in row 1 is equal to the sum of the elements in column 1, etc. Okay, and then return false otherwise. Okay, so I know that I'm going to have a loop that's going to need to go as many times as there are rows or columns. And the number of rows is the same as the number of columns. So I could either say for I equals 0, I less than nums bracket 0.length, I plus plus, or I could say I less than nums.length, I plus plus, because nums bracket 0.length, which is the number of columns, would be the same as nums.length, which is the number of rows. So I made two variables here. One is going to be the sum of a given row, and the other is going to be the sum of the corresponding column that has the same number as the row number. So the first thing I did after making those variables is I went across the columns in a given row to figure out what the sum of the values in a row is. So I have a for loop that goes from column 0 through the last column, and for a given row, and in this case it would be I, row I, because that's the row I'd be looking on from my outer loop, it would add up all the values in that row. And then I did the same thing for the column. So I'm going to be on the ith column now instead of the ith row. So I need to go down the rows in the ith column and add everything in each row for the ith column. So that's what this sum column plus equals row bracket I does. And then finally, if the sum of the row for that row is not equal to the sum column for that same column, then let's see, it would be, I think I have this reversed. It should be return false, and then if you make it all the way through the end without returning false, it would be returning true. So that's the first one. And then in the second one is kind of a variation on the seating chart problem from the other night, and that is you're given an array list of integers, so just pretty much a one-dimensional list that in the form of an array list, and you are supposed to make a 2D array out of those integers. Now you're going to make your 2D array is supposed to have 3 columns and then as many rows as would be necessary to fit in all the numbers, given your 2D array would have 3 columns. So right off the bat, I know I'm going to need to create a new 2-dimensional array, and I obviously know that it's going to have 3 columns, but the question is, how many rows is it going to have? Well, I kind of did some computations and tested it out, but if you have a number, the length of the array list is divisible by 3, well then that's pretty straightforward. You would need exactly the length of the array list divided by 3 rows and 3 columns, because 3 times the number of columns times the number of rows would equal the total number of elements, and that is a nice number that's divisible by 3, so it works out well. So the question then is, what happens if you have a number that isn't divisible by 3? Like, let's say I have 7 elements in my array list, or 5 elements in my array list. Well, it turns out if you have a number that's not divisible by 3, you actually need, and you do int division, you then actually need one more row than doing int division with 3. So, for example, if I have seven numbers to distribute, then if I do 7 divided by 3 columns, I get 2, but I would actually need an additional column, an additional row for that last number that, goes beyond the multiple of 3. So, for example, here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's supposed to return 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 0, 0, because you're supposed to fill in, according to the directions, zeros in any unused element. So, 7 divided by 3 is going to give you 2, but it turns out I would actually need 3 rows. So I always need, in the case of a number not divisible by 3, I always need one more than doing int division with 3 for that number. So, so when I was making my new array object, I checked to see here if the number was divisible by 3. If it was, I just needed the number of rows being the num size of the array list divided by 3. However, if it was not, I needed one more than the size of the array list divisible by 3. So that's what this if statement right here is all about. Now there might be some other ways to compute this. Some other formula that you could use. This was like the most obvious one to me. It's the first one that came to mind. And it was relatively straightforward, so I simply used it. Okay, so then I made two local variables, row and equals 0 and column equals 0, because the first element, the first value I'm going to put in is going to be in row 0, column 0. And then I had a for loop that went from the beginning of the array list to the end, and each time through the loop it added the next element, the value of the element, which would be nums.get pos, to position row call of my new array. Okay, and then after adding an element value, it increased column by 1. So the first time through, I'm going to be going across the column in row 0. And then I check to see if column reached the length of a row, which would be num2d bracket 0.length. That would mean that I would have to immediately set column back to 0 and then move on to the next row and do row plus plus. Okay, so, and then finally I would just return to the array. So that is my make 2D array problem. Now, I actually could have also used a for each loop for this part of the problem, because I'm really just going consecutively through the array list, one item at a time, and I don't need to really reference the position since I'm going straight through the array list. Now, I can't really do that for the array, but the array isn't really part of the setup of the for loop. So let me just show you what it would look like as a for loop. Okay, well, I am going to do, let's see, I'm going to say for each int element, element in, and my array list is called nums. Okay, and then instead of nums.get pos, I would just say element. So even though we have an array list of integers, once again, Java automatically unboxes the integer and turns it into an int. So I can just say for each int element in nums. Okay, so that's that one. And then finally, I just wanted to go over a for each loop, nested for each loops that would be used to go through a two-dimensional array. So the outer loop, if you're going through it, well, I think the only way to do it actually is, if you're going row in a row-wise order or row major order, meaning you're going one row at a time. So I would say for each, okay, in this case I have an array of ints. If it was strings, I would say string bracket, because remember, each row of a two-dimensional array is really an array of ints. So I would say for each int row in nums, the name of my array, and then the inner loop would be, okay, for each int element in row. So notice that whatever you choose here for the name of the proxy name for each array row in the two-dimensional array, you will repeat kind of diagonally right below it. So it's going to appear before the colon in the outer loop and then after the colon in the inner loop. So it's like, okay, for each row in nums, then for each value or element that's in row. So that's the way I remember it. And then now, instead of having to reference nums bracket I bracket j, you can just say element. Okay, so those are some sample problems. I may also just ask you nuts and bolts question like how do you compute the number of elements in an array? Well, that would be the number of rows. So if my array is nums, it would be nums dot length, which is the number of rows, times nums bracket 0 dot length, which is the number of columns. If I apparently I'm not typing real well here, so it would be that nums dot length times nums 0 dot length. And then let me see what else to know. Well, definitely know how to go through a two-dimensional array using nested for each loops, which we're not as comfortable. Most kids aren't as comfortable about as ordinary for loops, but you should definitely know that. Then let's see, really just the length of the array and the number of columns, and I think that's about it for the nuts and bolts questions. I mean, there might be one where it's like, okay, here's my array. It's, 1, 2, 3. Oh yes, the syntax of an array in curly brace form, of a two-dimensional array in curly brace format. It's basically an array of an arrays. So you're going to have sub curly braces where what's inside the curly braces is each row. Okay, so the question would be like, how do you reference, one question could be like, how do you reference the last element on the bottom row of a two-dimensional array if you do not know what the dimensions of the two-dimensional array are? Well, it would be like, okay, nums, and then the row number is going to be nums dot length minus 1, right? And then the column number, the last column, is going to be numbered nums bracket 0 dot length minus 1, because the last column has a number nums 0 dot length minus 1, and the last row is in position nums dot length minus 1. Just like the last element, the last character in a string is in position, the name of the string, dot length, parentheses, minus 1, and so on. Okay, so that's my little review. I hope that was helpful, and we will see you in class tomorrow.